I never thought much about the color sage green until I moved in with Owen. It was just a color, you know. Something I'd mention in passing when people asked about my favorite things, usually wedged between coffee and old bookstores on those getting-to-know-you lists. But Owen remembered. Owen always remembered the small things I said, even when I didn't think anyone was listening. We met through a housing app in August, both of us desperately searching for affordable rent in a city that seemed determined to bleed us dry. His profile picture showed a guy with dark hair and an easy smile, holding a rescue dog that wasn't even his. The bio said he was a graphic designer who worked from home and promised he wasn't a serial killer, which honestly was more reassurance than most roommate ads offered. We met for coffee at this place near campus, and I remember thinking he had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. Brown and warm, the kind that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. We talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, and by the end, we'd both signed the lease. Moving in was chaos. I'd never lived with anyone except my family, and suddenly here I was, 23 years old, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a complete stranger. Owen took the smaller room without even discussing it, said he didn't need much space. I tried to argue, but he just shrugged and started unpacking boxes, and that was that. He had this way of making decisions seem effortless, like he'd already thought through all the angles while I was still considering the first one. Those first few weeks were an adjustment. Learning someone else's rhythms, their habits, the sounds they make when they think no one's paying attention. Owen hummed when he cooked, old songs I half recognized from my parents' playlists. He always made too much food and would knock on my door around 7, asking if I wanted to share. I always said yes. We'd eat at our tiny kitchen table, talking about our days, and I started to look forward to those dinners more than I wanted to admit. I noticed things about him, the way he'd bite his lower lip when he was concentrating on a design project. How he'd leave little sticky notes around the apartment with reminders, or sometimes just doodles, tiny cartoons that made me smile. He was considerate in ways I hadn't expected, always asking if my music was too loud, if I minded when his friends came over, if I needed anything from the store. It was like living with someone who actually gave a damn about your existence, and I wasn't used to that. There was this night in September, maybe 3 weeks after we'd moved in. I'd had a terrible day at work, the kind where everything that could go wrong did, and I came home exhausted and frustrated. Owen took one look at my face and disappeared into the kitchen. 20 minutes later, he handed me a grilled cheese sandwich and a beer, told me to sit down, and just let me vent for an hour. He didn't try to fix anything or offer solutions. He just listened, really listened. And when I finally ran out of words, he said, "Tomorrow will be better." Such a simple thing, but I believed him when he said it. That's when I started noticing the feeling. This warmth in my chest when he'd smile at me. The way my heart would do this stupid flutter when I'd hear his key in the lock, knowing he was home. I'd catch myself watching him sometimes, studying the curve of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over his laptop. I'd never really thought about my sexuality much. I'd dated a few girls in college, nothing serious, and I'd always assumed that was just how it was. But with Owen, something was different. Something was waking up inside me that I'd kept carefully buried without even realizing it. I tried to ignore it at first, told myself it was just appreciation for a good roommate, gratitude for his kindness. But then there was the night we ended up watching a movie together, some thriller he'd been wanting to see, and we sat on our worn-out couch with a bowl of popcorn between us. Halfway through, he shifted closer, and our shoulders touched. Just that simple contact, and I felt electricity run through my entire body. I couldn't focus on the movie after that. All I could think about was the warmth of him next to me, the smell of his cologne, the sound of his breathing. When the credits rolled, he turned to me to ask what I thought, and I realized I couldn't remember a single plot point. October came with cooler weather and falling leaves. Owen started wearing these oversized sweaters that made him look soft and approachable, and I was in trouble. Real trouble. I'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about him in the next room, wondering if he ever thought about me, wondering what it would feel like to reach out and touch him, really touch him, not just accidental brushes in the kitchen. I'd never felt this way about anyone, and it terrified me. We fell into routines. Saturday morning coffee runs where we'd walk to the cafe down the street, arguing about whether oat milk or almond milk was superior. He was team oat, I was team almond, and we'd debate it with mock seriousness that made the baristas roll their eyes. Wednesday nights became our cooking experiment nights, where we'd try to make complicated recipes we found online and usually fail spectacularly. Owen would laugh when things went wrong, this full-body laugh that made his whole face light up, and I'd find myself trying to mess up on purpose just to hear it. His friends came over sometimes, and I'd watch him interact with them, noticing how tactile he was. He'd hug them hello, squeeze shoulders, ruffle hair. I started wondering if the way he was with me was special, or if that was just Owen being Owen with everyone. The thought that I might not be different, that these moments I treasured might be meaningless to him, made my stomach twist. There was this afternoon in late October when everything shifted slightly. We were both working from home, him in the living room, me at the kitchen table. I'd been struggling with a project, getting increasingly frustrated, and I must have sighed too loudly because Owen appeared next to me, looking concerned. He put his hand on my shoulder, and I froze. His thumb moved in small circles, a comforting gesture, and he asked if I was okay. I looked up at him, and our faces were so close, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, I saw something in his eyes. Something that mirrored what I was feeling. But then he stepped back, and the moment was gone, and I was left wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. I started paying closer attention after that, cataloging every interaction, every look, searching for signs. The way he'd smile when I walked into a room. How he always seemed to position himself near me when we were out with friends. The time he brought me soup when I had a cold, even though he was terrified of getting sick himself. These tiny moments that could mean everything or nothing at all. November brought rain and gray skies. I remember one evening, we were sitting in the living room, him sketching in his notebook, me reading a book I couldn't concentrate on. The rain was hitting the windows in steady rhythm, and the lamp cast warm light across his face. I must have been staring because he looked up and caught me. Our eyes held for a long moment, and I couldn't breathe. Then he smiled, this soft, almost shy smile, and went back to his sketching, and I went back to pretending to read. That's when I knew I was completely gone. This wasn't just attraction or a crush. I was falling in love with my roommate, and I had no idea what to do about it. I started having these elaborate fantasies about telling him. I'd imagine it 100 different ways. Casual mentions over dinner, serious conversations on the couch, notes slipped under his door, but every scenario ended with the same fear. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if I ruined everything we had, our friendship, our living situation, the comfortable life we'd built together? The risk felt enormous. Then one night in early December, we were hanging Christmas lights in the apartment, and I made some offhand comment about how I'd always loved sage green, how it reminded me of early spring and new beginnings. I didn't think anything of it. We were talking about colors for potential throw pillows, the most mundane conversation imaginable. Owen just nodded and asked if I wanted the lights warm white or cool white, and we moved on. 2 weeks later, I went home for a long weekend to visit my parents. It was the first time I'd left the apartment since we'd moved in, and I was surprised by how much I missed Owen. We texted a bit, nothing serious, just him sending me photos of his breakfast and me sending back pictures of my mom's cat. When I got back Sunday evening, exhausted from travel, I dumped my bag by the door and headed to my room. I opened the door and stopped dead. My room was different. The walls, which had been this boring beige since we'd moved in, were now painted a soft, perfect sage green. My favorite color, the color I'd mentioned once in passing weeks ago. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. Owen appeared behind me. I could feel him there before I turned around. When I did, he looked nervous, his hands shoved in his pockets, that little lip-biting thing he did when he was uncertain. "I hope this is okay," he said quietly. "You mentioned you loved sage green, and I thought maybe it would make your room feel more like yours. If you hate it, I can repaint it. I kept the receipt for the paint. It's really no problem to change it back." I couldn't speak. I was still processing, my brain trying to catch up with my heart. He'd painted my room. He'd remembered something I'd said once and spent his weekend painting my room. "You painted my room," I finally managed to say, and my voice came out rough. "Yeah," he said, and he was definitely nervous now, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I wanted to surprise you. I thought maybe you'd like it. Do you like it?" I looked at the walls again, the color exactly the shade I'd always loved, warm and calming and perfect. Then I looked back at Owen, at his anxious expression, at the paint still smudged on his forearm that he'd missed when cleaning up, and something inside me just broke open. "Owen," I said, and I took a step toward him. "Why did you do this?" He blinked, confused by the question. "Because you said you loved this color, because I wanted to do something nice for you. Because—" He trailed off, and I watched something shift in his expression, vulnerability replacing nervousness. "Because I pay attention to everything you say, because I remember all the little details you mention, because you matter to me." My heart was racing. "How much do I matter to you?" He went very still. I could see him processing, deciding something. Then he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, "More than a roommate should matter. More than a friend should matter." The world seemed to tilt. Everything I'd been feeling, all the hoping and wondering and being terrified, suddenly crystallized into this one perfect moment. "Owen," I said again, and I closed the distance between us. "I've been losing my mind for months. Every time you smile at me, every time we have dinner together, every time you do something thoughtful like this. I've been trying so hard not to feel what I'm feeling because I was scared of ruining what we have." His eyes widened. "What are you feeling?" I took a breath. This was it. The moment I either destroyed everything or changed everything. "I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I've already fallen. I don't know. All I know is that I think about you constantly. I look forward to coming home because you're here. I've never felt this way about anyone, and it terrifies me. But standing here, looking at these walls you painted because I mentioned a color once, I can't keep pretending anymore." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then his face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen, and he laughed this breathless, disbelieving sound. "Are you serious right now? You're falling in love with me?" "Yes," I said, and saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff. "Is that okay?" He stepped closer, so close I could count his eyelashes. "Reed," he said, and hearing my name in his voice like that made my knees weak. "I painted your room sage green because I'm already in love with you. I've been in love with you since probably September, maybe earlier. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you without freaking you out." I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're in love with me?" "So in love with you, it's actually embarrassing," he said, and he was smiling so wide. "I thought I was being obvious. I made you dinner every night. I brought you soup when you were sick. I memorized your coffee order and your schedule and the way you like your towels folded. I've been basically courting you for months." "I thought you were just being nice," I said, and I was smiling too now, so hard my face hurt. "I thought that was just who you were." "I am nice," he said, "but I'm not paint someone's entire room while they're gone nice to just anyone. That's reserved for people I'm desperately in love with." We stood there, grinning at each other like idiots. And then I did what I'd been wanting to do for months. I reached up and touched his face, running my thumb along his cheekbone. His skin was warm and he leaned into my touch, his eyes closing briefly. When they opened again, they were so full of emotion it made my chest ache. "Can I kiss you?" I asked, and my voice shook slightly. "Please," he said, and it came out almost like a prayer. I kissed him. Finally, I kissed him. His lips were soft and warm, and he made this small sound in the back of his throat that made my entire body light up. His hands came up to my waist, pulling me closer, and I wound my arms around his neck. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of us learning each other. Then it deepened, became more urgent, months of wanting and waiting pouring into it. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. He rested his forehead against mine, and I could feel him smiling. "I can't believe this is happening," he said. "Me neither," I said. "I thought I was going to have to pine after you forever." He laughed and kissed me again, quick and sweet. "You're really okay with the paint?" "I love the paint," I said. "I love that you remembered. I love that you did this for me." "I'd do anything for you," he said simply. And the way he said it, I knew he meant it. We stood there in the doorway of my newly painted room, holding each other, and I felt something settle in my chest. Like a piece of me that had been missing had finally clicked into place. This was right. This was where I was supposed to be. That night we stayed up until 3 in the morning, sitting on my bed, talking about everything. How he'd felt when we first met, how I'd been so oblivious to his feelings, all the moments we'd both been too scared to say anything. He told me about the night we watched the movie, how he'd been so aware of me next to him he couldn't follow the plot either. I told him about all the times I'd caught myself staring, how I'd lie awake thinking about him. "I was so jealous of your ex-girlfriend," he admitted at one point. "You mentioned her once, and I spent a week being irrationally angry at someone I'd never met. I was jealous of everyone you hugged," I counted. "Every single person. I wanted to be the only one you touched like that." He grinned and pulled me closer. "You are now. You're the only one I want to touch like this." And he kissed me again, slow and thorough, until I forgot what we'd been talking about. The next few weeks were a blur of happiness. We told our friends, who all claimed they'd known something was going on. Apparently, we'd been obvious to everyone except each other. We rearranged the apartment slightly, moving some of my things into his room because we couldn't stand sleeping separately anymore. We went on actual dates, held hands in public, did all the things couples do. But my favorite moments were still the quiet ones at home. Cooking dinner together, him wrapping his arms around me from behind while I stirred something on the stove. Saturday morning coffee runs where he'd lace his fingers through mine. Falling asleep next to him, his breath warm on my neck. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and just watch him sleep. Still hardly believing this was real. That this person, this wonderful, kind, thoughtful person, loved me. That I got to love him back. That we'd found each other through a random housing app and built something extraordinary. One night, about a month after we'd gotten together, we were lying in bed, the sage green walls of my old room visible through the open door. "You know what's funny?" I said. "If you hadn't painted that room, I might never have said anything. I might have just kept it to myself forever." He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me. "Really? I was terrified," I admitted. "Terrified of losing you, of making things weird, of ruining what we had. But you weren't scared when you saw the room." I thought about it. "No. When I saw the room, I knew. I knew you felt something too, even if I didn't know exactly what. And I knew I couldn't keep hiding how I felt. The risk suddenly seemed worth it." He kissed my forehead. "I'm glad I painted it then. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," I corrected. "Best decision was agreeing to be my roommate in the first place." He smiled, that beautiful smile that had captured my heart from the beginning. "Yeah, That was pretty good too. We lay there in comfortable silence for a while, and I thought about how much my life had changed in just a few months, how I'd gone from thinking I knew who I was to discovering entirely new dimensions of myself, how love had snuck up on me in the form of a roommate who remembered the small things, who painted walls and made grilled cheese and hummed while cooking, how sometimes the best things in life happen when you're not looking for them, when you're just trying to find affordable rent in an expensive city. "I love you," I said, and it still felt new and thrilling to say it out loud. "I love you too," he said back, and he pulled me closer. "Forever, if you'll let me." "Forever sounds perfect," I said, and I meant it with everything in me. The sage green walls still make me smile every time I see them. They're a reminder of the day everything changed, the day we stopped pretending and started being honest. They're the color of new beginnings, of taking risks, of love that builds slowly and then all at once. They're the color of home, not because of the walls themselves, but because of the person who painted them, the person who pays attention to every word I say, who remembers the details, who loves me with a quiet, steady certainty that makes me feel safe and cherished and completely myself. Sometimes love announces itself with grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's in the everyday kindness, the attention to detail, the willingness to spend a weekend painting a room just to see someone smile. Sometimes love is sage green walls and the person who put them there, who saw something in you worth remembering, worth keeping, worth loving. And that's how I fell in love with my roommate. In an apartment that smells like fresh paint and new possibilities, one small moment at a time.